Alright, so welcome to the Strike Double Lift. As you probably know, I did a live stream on the Strike Double Lift pretty much 2 weeks back, and I wasn't really happy with the results, so I'm refilming everything, and now we have a more controlled environment where I can probably just spout whatever I want and all of that stuff without like needing to re-say anything, because the live stream was honestly a mess. But yes, this is going to be the Strike Double Lift. So it's also called the flip over double lift. It's also called the hit double lift. There's basically a whole bunch of names, but I'll call it by the strike double lift because that's how I actually learned to call it as, okay? So what the strike double lift is actually a brakeless multiple turnover, which means that there will be no get ready for the double lift. Now that I really think about it, this is actually the second, basically the only second double lift sort of related technique. The first one that I did was actually the soft double by Roger Klaus, but besides that, everything else was sort of revolving around the double lift, like the pinky count and all that stuff, but nothing explicitly like double related. All right, so it's kind of weird because it's such a fundamental technique. So I'll cover more in the future, but what's really interesting about the strike double lift that most people don't actually know about is that there's actually two distinct ways to actually do a strike double lift, which I'll go over both methods in this video. So historically, there's actually been a long list of brakeless multiple turnovers. The first brakeless multiple turnover, to my knowledge, is actually in New Era card tricks back in 1897 by August Roderberg, where the idea was actually just briefly touched upon. So, quote, he removes the top card, carrying with and hidden behind it the selected card, unquote. So it's just a very, very brief idea, nothing that's necessarily really like concrete, but as far as we can tell from the brief description, it's a brakeless multiple lift, which, yeah, it doesn't really give us a method or anything, so that's it. The next brakeless multiple turnover that we get a description of is actually in Greater Magic back in 1938 by John Northern Hilliard. So that was a brakeless double lift, but actually done with a short card. So as you remember, we went through short cards in the guide to concepts video. So that was actually done in a sort of bill grip, and the short card was on top of the deck, so you could just pick up the top card, both cards with no issue. So that is in Greater Magic. And then the next one that we can get into is More Card Manipulations, issue 2 by G. Newgard. So that was in 1939. So there he goes over a technique called the Carlisle Snap Double Lift by Francis Carlisle. So what this is that it's actually a multiple turnover using crimps. So again, we went through crimps in our video as well. So basically what happened is that this card was actually bent slightly upwards. So this is the second from top card, which means that now you have this space in between of the deck and of the card. So now what this means is that your index finger can just reach over, contact the space separating the double and the rest of the deck, and they could just turn over everything all at once. And this was using a crimp, a corner crimp, just like so. And then we get to the card magic of Paul Lepaul by Paul Lepaul back in 1949. So that is where the modern day strike double actually comes from, or rather the first version of the modern day strike double actually comes into play. So that's going to be the first one that I'm going to describe. And then we have Stars of Magic, which was published in the 1940s to 1950s. It's sort of like been periodically like published. So that was by George Stark, and there Dr. Jacob Daley actually goes over a technique called the instantaneous double lift. That's where the second method for the strike double lift actually comes into play. It was actually Marlowe who gave the name to this multiple turnover, the hit double name. So that was in the Cardition back in 1953 by Ed Marlowe. But the credits of the book actually say that the hit double actually dates back to 1949, at least in Marlowe's hands, right? But we know that multiple turnovers actually like reach way beyond like Marlowe, okay? So that's the brief history regarding the strike or the hit or the flip over double lift. So let's go over the Paul Lepaul method first. So this is going to be mainly his handling, but there's going to be some personal touches thrown in there, here and there, so yeah. So we're going to hold the deck in a standard dealer's grip. Now notice the bevel in the deck, right? There's obviously like there's forever going to be a bevel in the deck every time that you hold a deck of cards, mainly because, well, cards are not one singular block. The cards will conform to the shape of your hand and it'll naturally be slanted. So over here, you'll notice that there is a bevel. So this bevel is going to be very, very important for the mechanics. So what you're going to do now is that you're going to slightly dip your left wrist downwards. So originally it's parallel with the ground. You're just going to slightly dip it downwards like so, okay? Just a slight dip. And now, as you do so, you're actually going to roll over your left thumb to the right. Okay, so you'll notice that as I dip down, my left thumb rolls over until you expose the nail of your left thumb. So this actually does two things. One, it actually allows the pad of my thumb to press down on top of the deck, which anchors everything down. Okay, as I tilt my hand. The second thing actually allows this deck to do is that actually increases the bevel, which will make the move easier. All right, so you'll notice that actually allows the deck to bevel more. So this is without rolling the thumb, and this is with rolling the thumb. So now you'll notice that the bevel is now increased. So the next thing you're going to do now is that you're going to extend your right index, and it's going to contact the bottom right corner of the deck. Just like so over here. So it's just going to be like the pad of your index finger, okay? Now, because of the bevel, your index finger, when it actually just contacts this, it should only be contacting one card, okay? So what happens is when you lift up on your index finger, this should bring up one card. Okay, so that is why there's a bevel. So you're just going to lift up on one card, and you're going to lift it up by just a slight hair. All right, so it's just going to be a very, very tiny amount. Okay, so right after you pull up on this one card, your index finger is just going to curl in just a touch. It's just going to curl in just a touch, and it's going to contact the second card like so. So it's just going to, it's kind of hard from this angle, but your index, the pad of your index, lifts on one card. It's just going to curl in a bit just once more to contact the second card. And now you can lift up on the second card once more. So now what you have is the card, a space, the card, and then a space, and then the rest of the deck, just like so. Okay? So what's basically happening is you're basically just riffling cards off. That's basically what's happening in the more rudimentary form, but it's literally you're lifting up one card and then you're lifting up a second card, okay? And so this should be happening around the front of the pad of your finger over here. I'm just doing it from the center because that's how I best display it from this angle. So you're going to increase the bevel, lift up, and then lift a second card, like so, okay? So lift up, curl in, contact second card, lift up once more, like so, okay? So now that you have this, what you're going to do is that you're just going to undip your wrist, okay? So you're just going to let your left wrist go back parallel with the rest of your ground. And what you'll notice is that this actually allows these two cards to slide on top of your index finger, like so. And during that process, they'll actually converge into one singular card. So you'll notice that the space in between the both cards just decreases as you slide these two cards on top of your index finger, like so. So then they converge into one card, okay? At the same time, your middle finger is just gonna catch this bottom short edge of the two cards over here, okay? So it's just gonna act as a net, like so. And your right thumb is gonna press down on the two cards, pinching them with the index finger. So now you have this corner grip over here, all right? So now both cards are going to be pinched in between the index and the thumb, and your middle finger is just going to be caging them from the bottom short edge, okay? So you basically just undip your wrist, middle finger, thumb, and then you have one singular card. Okay. So now you're holding a double in your right hand. Okay. So now what's going to happen is very, very easy. You're just gonna pull your right hand until this double hits the left middle ring and pinky finger, and you're just gonna turn this card around like so. Okay? And you're just gonna let the double gently fall on top of the deck. To turn the cards back over, you're just going to repeat the move, except now, because these two cards are sort of just popping upwards because of the way that the cards are bent, you don't really have to repeat the same process. All your index finger has to do now is just dig in between of this gap, pinch everything, middle finger contacts the bottom short edge, and you could just turn everything over once more. Okay? So that is essentially the Lepaul method of doing the strike double lift. You're just lifting one card, lifting two cards, undipping your wrist, and then turning everything around. And then, yeah, that is the Lepaul strike double lift. Now, as an additional note, if you want to do this move as more than just like a double lift, as like a triple lift, a quadruple lift, I don't know why you would ever need a quadruple lift at this point, but what's basically happening is that you're just going to repeat the same process but with more cards. So you're going to lift up on one card, curl in your index, lift up on two, curl in your index once more, lift up on this third card, and then you basically have a triple lift. Okay? And you're just going to do the same thing, undip your left wrist, trap everything in between your middle finger and your thumb, like so, and then you have three cards. Okay, so that is the Lepaul method for doing the strike double lift. Now, another note is that once you get used to this move, you don't have to limit yourself to just the bottom right corner. If you want, you can also do this move from the center or from the top right corner of the deck. So you can do this from the center, lift up on the center, lift up once more, undip your wrist, and then you could do it from the center of the deck, or you can do the same thing from the top of the deck, right? Lift up on one, lift up on two, lift up on three if you want, undip your left wrist, right? Trapping everything with your middle finger, pinch everything, and then turn everything over, like so. So really, this concept of just picking up one card, picking up two cards, picking up three, or so on, it can be applied to any corner, any edge of the deck, right? You don't only have to, you don't necessarily have to confine yourself to this particular corner. Okay, so those are just two additional notes regarding the Lepaul strike double lift. Now let's go over the Dr. Jacob Daley method for the strike double lift. Just like before, you're going to bevel the deck towards the right with your left thumb pressing down on the left long edge of the deck, which is just there to apply counter pressure when you turn over the card. Okay, so it's the same thing. You're just going to dip your left wrist down and just roll your thumb and pinch everything with your left thumb. Okay, so same exact thing. Now what happens is that your right index actually contacts the right long edge of the deck near the center. Okay, so you'll notice that this right index is actually relatively straight, right? It's not going to be at an angle or anything. It's just going to be relatively straight down. Okay, so the pad of my index is pressing along this edge of the deck over here. All right. Now, the mechanics of this variation of the strike double lift all depend on how hard you're actually pressing down on this long edge of the deck. Because here's actually what's happening. Because of the bevel, the flesh of the index finger will only contact a certain amount of cards at a time. This can change depending on the amount, depending on how hard you actually press down on the edge of the deck, right? So if I just press down with my index and just if I just contact the beveled deck with my index and just lift up, that's just going to be one card, right? Because I'm not pressing down hard and I'm not allowing the flesh to actually spill into the bevel, okay? But if I actually want to contact 2 cards, all I need to do now is that, if you can see, press down harder with my index, which allows more flesh to actually just contact more cards, like so. So you'll notice that it actually just bulges out a bit and wraps around more cards. So that's actually what's happening. It's just wrapping around more cards. So if just touching the bevel allows me to lift up on one card, then just apply the slightest amount of pressure, and this allows me to lift up on 2 cards naturally, right? You can see that it's just 2 cards. So over here, just contacting it allows me to lift 1 card. Pressing slightly, a slight bit more allows me to lift 2 cards up. Pressing really hard lets me lift up like 6, right? So this is a very, very pressure-based move, right? Depending on how hard you press down with your index, that's the amount of cards that you're going to pick up. And that's why having a nice equal bevel is extremely important for this variation of the move, okay? Now, if you don't get this move right straight away, that's fine, because again, this is going to be a pressure-based move. So you're going to have to play around a lot with how hard that you're going to be pressing down on the deck, right? So also note that the thickness of the deck will affect this move as well. So if you're using thicker cards versus thinner cards, right? Depending on the bevel and depending on how hard you press the index, this pressure that you need will change depending on the deck. So you also have to take that into consideration. But right now, I just need to press the slightest amount of pressure and I can lift up on 2 cards, like so. Okay, so this all happens as I'm doing just a regular just a slight dip down. Okay, so that's what's happening, and that's 2 cards. Okay, so this all depends on how hard my index is pressing down. So once you find that sweet spot and you lift up on these 2 cards, what you're going to do now is going to be the exact same as the Lepaul method for the strike double lift. You're just going to undip your wrist, allowing your index to dig into the space in between of both cards. Your right thumb is just going to go over it and pinch the center of the card, and then you could just turn over this double like so. Okay, so Dr. Jacob Daley actually mentions that you should only use the right index to support the double and then let it fall on top of the deck. So what this means is that you're dragging the double, it hits the middle ring and pinky finger, and what now is that you actually release the double with your thumb, allowing it to contact only your right index, like so, and you're just gonna slightly move your right hand to the left and just let everything gently fall on top of the deck, like so. Okay, so that is the Dr. Jacob Daley method of just turning over a card. Very, very simple, very, very elegant. So it's just this. Okay, so it's just a light stroke, okay? And then, as with the Lepaul method for the strike double lift, because of the natural curvature of the deck, there will be a break formed, right? A natural break formed. You can just go ahead and pick up on that and just repeat the same process without much of a hassle. So that is the Dr. Jacob Daley method for the strike double lift. So here are just a couple of tips regarding the strike double lift. If you're having trouble with either like with the Dr. Jacob Daley method or the Lepaul method, right? Try beveling the deck a bit more, okay? Because if I only have this much bevel, it's gonna be a lot harder for me to contact like one card or two cards precisely, right? I might have a chance of like getting more than one card, or if I have like this little amount of bevel, it's gonna be harder for me to lift up on one card specifically. So I want to have sort of an exaggerated bevel, and you don't really have to care about that because, well, your thumb is hiding it and your index is hiding it, so you really don't have to. You really don't have to care about this amount, all right? So just increase the bevel, all right? Don't worry about it. Increase the bevel, and it'll make learning this move and using this move a lot easier, okay? The second thing is that if you're using an older deck like I am with this one, chances are you might have a bit of a trouble picking up on one card only because, well, for older decks, you can see there's all of these little bumps here and there, right? All of these little bends. These little bends can actually make this move more difficult because if let's say that like the third card was actually bent, right? If it was like bent like so, right? If it's bent like so, there's actually a chance for me to actually feel out and accidentally pick up on that third card because it's bent, right? So remember the Francis Carlisle version of the break double of the breakless multiple turnover, right? It uses a crimp. This bent card can act as a crimp, which can make me accidentally pick up on it, which can make me get a triple instead of maybe like a double or anything like that, okay? So if you're just learning this move and you're using an old deck, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I would recommend you to use a maybe more a broken in deck, but not necessarily a bent deck, okay? So something that you can bevel with and just keep stable without the card sliding around, but you also don't want the cards to be bent and all disgusting, and that'll interfere with learning the move, okay? So maybe like a new broken in deck. That's generally the type of deck that you want to use when learning this move, okay? So yeah. Also, when you're first learning this move, don't hesitate to bend the hell out of the cards, right? You really want to get used to the feeling of having two or whatever number of cards that you want. Like you really want to get used to it with your right hand, right? And I can't necessarily get used to that feeling if I don't bend the hell out of the cards, right? So you really want to feel what it's like to have two cards or three cards, all right? So just get used to the feeling of having like this three cards, yeah. So you really want to get used to bending the cards, feeling the amount of cards in your hand, and just getting used to just knowing how many cards do you have at a moment's touch, okay? So yeah, just bend the hell of the cards, feel, that's two. So yeah. The fourth and final tip that I have for you is play around with the move, all right? Play around with the move, and this sounds stupid, but you have to play around with the amount of pressure that you're applying on the cards, because if you don't know the amount of pressure that you're applying on the cards, how else are you gonna know, right? So you're gonna have to play around with the pressure of the move, play around with the pressure that you're applying on the cards. You're also gonna have to play around with varying like thicknesses, right? Like I said, thicknesses do affect the thickness of the deck, do affect like how this move actually feels. So you're gonna have to play around with the finishes, the thickness of the cards, how much pressure you're applying. So all of these are important for making this move work, and all of these should be things that you're taking into consideration when you're actually doing this move, okay? So play around with all of these factors. Now let's get into what this move offers versus other multiple turnovers and other switches. So like I mentioned before at the start of this video, this move has no get ready. Usually for multiple turnovers or double lifts, you might see like a thumb count, right? Or maybe like from the back, or maybe a pinky count, right? This doesn't need that, right? Usually for a thumb count or a pinky count or whatever, that requires misdirection. For this move, you actually don't need misdirection because you do it on the spot, right? That was double. But on the other hand, if you screw up a pinky count or a thumb count, that doesn't matter, right? Because you have misdirection. You're giving yourself that time to redo this move, right? Because you can just talk and you're like, oh crap, I accidentally counted like 3 cards. I can always just redo this move, right? So doing a pinky count or a get ready lets me, right, redo the move in case I screw it up. I can't do that with a breakless double lift. I can't do that with a hit double lift because I'm put on the spot, right? The moment I have to do a breakless turnover, right, I have to do it with all the spectators looking at me. So if I screw up this move, right, if I accidentally count 3 cards and it's not the right card, I'm like, oh, I can't just be like, oh, let me redo the move, right? I can't do that. I have to, I'm screwed, right? So, I mean, you can always salvage it by being like, oh yeah, here, wrong card, sorry. Let me snap, and then look, it's okay. Nope, this crimp is killing me. So I can always do like, yeah, look, and then like, oh yeah, look, it changed back to your card, right? So what happens is that you won't get a second chance, right? Unless you unless you have enough experience to salvage that situation, right? Versus a pinky count, you can always just redo it because you have that time, you have that misdirection, but you don't have that with a brickless turnover because you're put on the spot. You're doing the turnover the moment like everyone's looking at your hands, okay? So that is something that most people don't actually talk about when they talk about the strike double lift, okay? So there's basically no safety net when you're doing a strike double lift. So the second thing that I want to point out is that there's actually a dipping of the wrist and the deck, which is sort of unusual, right? So some people will say that because the strike has no double lift and because it looks like you're just grabbing one card, that the strike is the most natural looking multiple turnover. But I have 2 comments to address that. One is that no one dips the wrist and the deck to turn a card around, right? That's so bizarre, right? Because like if you're just a layperson, you would just do this, right? You wouldn't have to dip the deck and the wrist to turn over a card, right? The second thing is that lay people don't turn the card book style, right? So most lay people do not do this, right? This only happens to people like us, right? To people who are used to handling cards. So if you ever hand a deck to a layperson, you'll find all types of turnovers, right? You'll see like this, right? Or you'll see like this, right? There is no natural looking multiple turnover because we're already doing it differently right from the start. No layperson turns around a card like this, right? They do everything except that. So there is no natural looking turnover because everyone does it differently, okay? So just the fact that there's a dip and that people try and argue that's the most natural looking double lift, I don't necessarily think it's true and I don't necessarily agree with it. A third comment that I have is that let's compare this switch to other switches, right? Like the second deal or the glide, all right? So when the glide or the second deal actually occurs, the moment of the switch actually occurs, right, on the deck, right? For the glide as well, it occurs on the deck, right? It's the same thing with the double lift, right? The switch occurs on the deck, right? The only difference with the strike double lift, with double lifts in general versus like the glide or second deal is that you're actually dirty for most of the time, right? Because with a double lift, you turn the card over. The moment you turn this card over, you're dirty because now you have 2 cards. Now you have something to hide all the way until you turn this card back over, right? So the period in which that you're handling a dirty object is very, very long. Versus a second deal or a glide, right? The only time that this move is actually necessarily like dirty is when the move occurs. So if I do the glide, right? that's the only time that my hands are dirty, because otherwise I can freely handle this card and I could just deal it out or do whatever. And then the only time that it's dirty is when it's in my hands, right? Same with the second deal. The only time that this card is dirty is when I actually do the move, right? The second deal, it's dirty all the way until I turn the card back over, okay? Now, let's take a look at the top change, right? The top change, again, like I mentioned, is very unique to switches in that there's this distinct element of isolation. It occurs away from the deck, right? Right? Like they don't feel that there's a switch when the switch happens, okay? And this card is thoroughly isolated, okay? So that's something that you also have to take notice of, is that the switch occurs away from the deck versus the double lift, it occurs on top of the deck. But again, there's also this element of, well, the top change can't flash, right? The top change is not burnable, right, when the switch occurs. But the double lift, right, it's burnable, right? You can just take a look at it, right, do whatever, and then you could just turn everything back around, right? So each and every single one of these switches has their own pros and cons. So you just basically have to determine which of these actually suits your style and which of these actually suits the current context that you're in, right? Because I know some people always do double lifts, which is fine, but sometimes for certain effects, there's a certain context where, let's say I'm reaching over, right? I wouldn't do a double lift and I wouldn't like reach over the deck and do that and then just do this, right? It would be a lot more, well, one, it would fit the context if I was reaching over and I was just exchanging the card there, right? And I could just place it on top, right? So there's whatever, like there's no like best switch, there's no best move, there's no most natural looking move. It all depends on the context and it all depends on whatever that you're most comfortable with. So that is the strike double lift in comparison to other switches and other double lifts. Now, if you're interested in the strike double lift, there are many resources. The first one that I can recommend is Spirit in the Walls by Florian Brooks. He has this very nice, very nice looking strike double lift, and it's called the Reliable Double Lift. It's something that I practice here and there, but it's not necessarily something that I use because I much prefer the push off double lift. But if you do want a very nice strike double lift, that is one of the sources that I can recommend you. The next is Card Magic of Paul Lepaul by Paul Lepaul. So that I already taught the method to his double lift over there, but again, like the Card Magic of Lepaul, there's so much more material in there, which I highly recommend that you look up. And then there's Stars of Magic by George Stark. There's the again, Stars of Magic, a classic. You should already have it, so go read up on the Dr. Jacob Daley method of the strike double lift in there. There's also, I believe, 2 other double lifts in Stars of Magic, so you can go ahead and look at that book. So then you get like 3 double lifts in one book, okay? There's The Cardition by Ed Marlowe, which is where the hit double lift comes from. And then we have In Concert by Roger Klaus. I already sort of mentioned the soft double, but there's also another type of break list multiple turnover in that book as well. The Magic of Ascanio, More Studies of Card Magic by Arturo de Ascanio. My Spanish is horrible, I'm sorry. And then we have Card Classics of Ken Krenzel by Ken Krenzel, written by Harry Lorraine. So all of these sources contain various different break list multiple turnovers. And you could go ahead and look at all of those, and as per usual, the sources will be down in the comments down below. So that was it for the hit double lift, or the strike double lift, or the flip over double lift. There was actually a time where I actually liked to use the strike double lift, but nowadays, like I mentioned before, I just much prefer using the push off double lift. Honestly, at the end of the day, I don't really think it matters because like I said, there's no natural looking move, right? There's no best move out there, right? What matters is that the move that you're currently doing suits the context of what's currently going on, and it's also like a matter of what you're most comfortable with, right? Because if I say like, the strike double lift is best looking double lift, and you end up doing something like this, like it's just not gonna look right, okay? It's also not gonna look natural. So take into consideration what you're comfortable with, take into consideration like what the current context is, and I think that you're gonna be a lot happier with what you have and all that stuff. So yeah, that is the strike double lift, refilmed and re-edited because yeah. So yeah, that's gonna be it for me today. Stay healthy, stay safe, and see you guys next time.